First off, on behalf of the Huber family, we would like to welcome every single one of you for coming today and spending the next couple of hours with us as we celebrate Joe Huber's life. Now, as most of you know, Uncle Joe was never about a lot of pomp and circumstance and all that stuff, especially when it was about him. And he was actually very specific in his letter as to what he wanted. He said, no obituary, blah. No funeral, who wants all of that depressing stuff? But it's okay if you guys want to do a small gathering. And so that's what we're going to do today. And it's going to be a celebration of the life that he lived, which he lived with a great deal of love, both in terms of what he gave and for those of us who gave it back to him. My name's Amanda Wiltshire Crane. I am Joe Huber's goddaughter, and you'll often hear me referring to him as my uncle because he was, from my perspective. And I will be hosting the program today. So with that, let me go ahead and walk through what we're going to be doing. And if you can't remember all of it, it's okay. I will be queuing you up. And then afterwards, we would like to invite everyone over to my Aunt Joan's house, which is just around the corner, and the address, I think, is written on cards at the entrance. So we'll start with a few folks coming up who have said that they would like to say a few words. And if you have not volunteered for that, but you get inspired, don't be shy, we'll have a spot for you as well. And the order will be starting with Marty Crane, Aunt Joan's best friend and my mother. Bobby Edmundowitz, Uncle Joe's nephew, who will be reading a letter on behalf of the Kumik family. Ashley Eyre, a longtime family friend, who will read a note from Daniel Gadd, who was a Swedish exchange student from all the way back in 2000, but is very much a member of the family today. Marissa Huber East, his daughter, followed by Megan Huber and Ryan Edmundowitz, sharing something that Uncle Joe had written about his wife for her 70th birthday. And I know that you're never supposed to tell a woman's age, especially in public, but this one is quite special. And then I've written a few words, and then we'll open up the floor to anyone else. We'll also then have Anne-Marie, Uncle Joe's sister, reading a very short poem that we thought was just hitting the right note. And then we'll end that with a song, and we'll keep what those songs are as a little surprise, but I think you will all smile. So we will begin. Marty?
Of all the people in the room, I'm the only one that knew Joan before Joe. We met in 1969 on Labor Day at a picnic sponsored by the East-West Center, where we both were scholarship students at the University of Hawaii. When you come 12,000 miles away from home and you have no support system, you either make very good friends, marry the first person you date, or crack up. Joan and I became sisters. We ate all our meals together. I forced her to learn to play bridge. We played with everybody who came from a British Empire country. And for those of you who know our friend Larry, he and his wife are sorry they're not here, we would go out with Larry double dating. It would be Joan, me, and Larry, because Larry was engaged to somebody else. And her parents would find out because they lived in Hawaii and she was in Chicago. So the three of us hung out together a lot. In the summer of 1970, part of our scholarship sent the American students to Asia to study and sent the Asian students to the mainland of the U.S. Joan went to Ohio State. The first letter I received was, there's this guy who's been hanging around lately. He's kind of interesting. Joan, what's going on? Well, went out for my birthday. We went on a picnic with this guy named Joe. I write, who's Joe? our friends start coming back from the East Coast, and they say, "Oh, Marty, Joan says she misses you." "Oh, well, no, she doesn't. It's Joe." So she gets off the plane in Hawaii, and I go, "Who's Joe?" And she says, "Oh, wait till you see." And she whips out, you know those little booths you used to get into and take pictures? Well, you're seeing many of those faces on here today. Bunny ears. I'm going, "Are you sure?" He's wonderful. I went off to Asia for my field studies. She would write to me, we talked to Joe, I'm going to California for Christmas. Well, her deadline was ticking. Joan was on a J2 visa, and for those of you in education, you know that means you can't hang around the U.S. When you're done with your studies, you have to go home. I'm writing, he better propose. Tell him he's nuts if he lets you go home, because she'd have to be back in the Philippines for at least 2 years. Joe would occasionally tease her that she married him for a green card. But he did propose. And while I was in Asia, I had the luck to go to the Philippines, meet her father, her twin sister, her older sister, and bring back Joan's wedding dress, which you also see in some of these photos. In the Philippines, you're not supposed to put your wedding dress on before the day of the wedding. Lucky for Joan, she had a twin sister that their friend who was a dressmaker could fit it to. But when we brought it back, she had me put it on so she could determine what size heels to buy. They were married in Ohio State at the Catholic Student Center there. They went on their honeymoon because they wanted to go to Canada, but Joan's visa wouldn't let her go. At Mackinac Island in Michigan. And then they went to New York, where Joe pursued his MBA. Joan and I are still writing. I have yet to meet Joe. She is working at Rutgers at the time. And I finally finished my degree, came home, started teaching, and then made a trip to New York. And that was the first time I met Joe. Turns out Joe had a love of the ballet, like Joan and I did. I was never quite sure whether he loved the dance or just those half-naked women. But he and Joan had taken classes on ballet, and it was a spectacular weekend. With the week I was there, Nureyev was in town, and Baryshnikov had just defected, and we went to see them as well. And then they took me to Broadway for Pimpin' with Ben Vereen. I really liked Joe. But we had my first kitchen disaster. Those who know Joe know that he was not the most adventurous eater. And one of the things that he absolutely despised was onions. Well, I love to cook, so I said, "Joan, let me cook. Please, let me cook." She said, "Okay, guys have done so much for me. Let me cook dinner." I said, I'm gonna cook Quinn's Vietnamese chicken cashews." So I cooked this whole thing up. I put it down, and here's Joe, very politely, picking the chicken and the cashews out. Well, it's like 6 onions. I said, "You don't like onions?" "No." Joan! So for the next 40 years, it was like, okay, chop the onions big so Joe can pull them out. When Joan and Joe decided they wanted to have a family, they decided they didn't want to stay in the New York area. So Joe came down, and he stayed with my folks and I, and he would take me to work at Plantation High, where I was teaching at the time, and then he would drive down to Miami to do his job interviews. And that's where he fell in love with Plantation. When he came down and had taken the job with Southeast Banks, and he brought Joan down, we went to look at some other apartments. And the one I'll always remember, because we had such a hard time keeping a straight face, is we went to look at this one right near the Perry Airport off of University Drive and Hollywood Boulevard. And it was the year of the avocado and shag carpet. And the guy was in the apartment working on it. He was so proud of it. It had green shag carpet everywhere, including going up the walls in stripes, including mirror between the stripes. And we're all trying to, oh, very nice, yes, yes. And then we got out in the car and we all broke out in hysteria laughing. Joan and Joe decided on Plantation Gardens. They moved there, and then shortly before I adopted my daughter, I moved into the same complex, but a couple of buildings away. Joe bonded with my family over football. He and my mom loved football. And every Sunday before we had our kids, Joan and Joe, my mom, Dad, and I would pile into the car and go down to across from the Orange Bowl, the old folks' home there that used to rent out parking spaces, have our picnic lunch, and then go to the Dolphins. And we were lucky. It was the 74, 75, 76 to 79, the good years. The most wonderful thing about Joe, being Joan's friend, and as many of you know, was his generosity. Now, I don't mean generosity when it comes to giving money away, but I mean his generosity in sharing his wife and his family with the rest of us. Having been single most of my life, many of my friends would get married, and once they got married, I'd see them once a week or maybe once a month, and then it got down to once a year. But Joe was willing to share Joan with me and with my family and with all of her friends. He shared Joan with Barb and Sue, Margie, Vera, Debbie's, Susan, Sandy, and the rest of us. He shared family holidays at my house. After my father died, he was daddy at the table. And so for my daughter, he was not just her godfather, but her father figure. He went through more cooking disasters with no complaint whatsoever. The most amazing one was I tried to make this cake once that was all whipped cream on the top, and then it was supposed to have a caramel layer, and then a cake underneath, and it wouldn't cut because I overcooked the caramel. And Joe's out there with a saw trying to cut this cake. And it's just splattering all over every place. So he always teased me about that one. Joe would take in strays. Not just the Cummix animals when they went on vacation, but Daniel, who was in need of a home, Joan's friend Susan, when she had an operation and needed a place to recuperate, all of Marissa and Andrew's friends when they were on the outs with their parents. He was an amazing man for those reasons, and he will be missed.
So I just saw Bridget. So you're up next, by the way. Yes. We have your letter here, so.
Okay.
So in case folks are wondering, this is a very close friend of the family, Bridget, and who used to be one of our babysitters, by the way, growing up. So she's her sister.
So I'm Bobby Edmundowitz. I'm Anne Marie's oldest son. Anne Marie was Joe's sister. And I get to read this beautiful letter from the Cummix family. I was asked about 5 minutes ago, so hopefully I do it justice. And before I read that, I didn't have anything prepared to say today, but Uncle Joe was a big part of my life growing up. My family and rest of the Huber clan would always get together for family gatherings, trips, and we just Disney World. We had a lot of fun, and he was a big part of my childhood, and I miss him. So I just wanted to say that. So on behalf of the Cummix family, Ted, Kathy, Jennifer, Bridget, and Tara, we would like to share our fondest memories of Joe Huber, who we will miss dearly. We have so many warm memories of the Huber family from our time living in Plantation. We first met Joe and Joan as neighbors in a new small community called Pechos in the park. Patios. Wasn't sure if that was Greek. Sorry. Patios in the park. It was a close-knit. It was a close-knit neighborhood where children played Marco Polo for hours in the community pool and held parades in the streets for our entertainment. Before long, the Hubers became the family to us, as we shared so many special moments together. How could you not love a family with someone so inviting and kind as Joan, and someone so jovial and friendly as Joe? They were always so much fun to be around, and raising our children together is one of the greatest blessings of our lives. We both had families who lived far away, but we always had each other. Jennifer and Bridget babysat for Marissa and Andrew when Joan and Joan would go to their Saturday night dinner and movie. They always enjoyed Joe's take on the movie they saw when he would recap bringing them home. Joe was like a second father to our children and a confidant to Ted, as they shared many of the same experiences raising a family. Tara and Marissa did Indian Princesses together, and I believe there's a photo of some of that. There was earlier. With Joe and Ted guiding their way. What fun stories they had to share. To this day, we refer to them and Aunt Joan and Uncle Joe. There are many memories of Christmas tree shopping, Christmas Eve parties, and so much more. We all love being around Joe, as he has brought tremendous joy and a witty sense of humor to almost any occasion. Joe was a brilliant, kind-hearted soul, and his loss leaves a void in our lives. But we take comfort knowing he is telling his witty jokes in heaven with Andrew by his side. We love you, Joe.
Ashley? Hi, I'm Ashley Eyre. I've known Joe pretty much as long as I can remember. My brother and Andrew were good friends in actually elementary school, I believe, and I'm younger than my brother, so literally since I can remember, I've known the Hubers. Marissa was a babysitter of mine and had a lot of fun times with her and her friends. And she asked me today to read a letter from Daniel, who was their Swedish exchange student. But before I do, I'm just going to tell one quick story that makes us laugh a lot. We can't remember if it was on one of the evenings that Marissa was babysitting me or if it was a Christmas Eve party at the Hubers' house, which we went to every year. But there was a Monopoly game involved, and as you all know, Monopoly can take a long time. And we didn't play a lot of board games at my house because I don't think we had patience. But we played a Monopoly game, and of course it wasn't finished by the time my parents were ready to either pick me up or go home from the party, can't recall. Apparently they didn't appreciate the length of time a Monopoly game takes, so I had a complete meltdown. I don't remember if I was old enough to be having a meltdown, but I had one. And Joe felt so bad for me, and he made a promise to me that went on for 25 years that we were going to finish that Monopoly game. So literally every single time I saw Joe, he brought up this Monopoly game. Finally, Marissa and I got so tired of hearing the Monopoly game in adulthood that we played it about 5 years ago, me, Marissa, Mike, and Joe. And I think Joe had the most fun out of all of us, although it was a really fun night. So that kind of leads me into this letter from Daniel, because Joe was somebody who I also called Uncle Joe often, and who loved his kids so much, but also loved all of the kids that came around him. He was just so funny and playful with all of us, and the way that the Hubers took in Daniel, who came here from Sweden and ended up in a home that really wasn't working for him, and the Hubers heard about it from a neighbor and said, come on, come live with us. And so a little bit of that backstory is kind of, you can hear it in Daniel's words here. So this is a letter he wrote. Dear Joe, 18 years ago, you and your family opened your doors to a 17-year-old Swedish stranger, me. And you not only offered me a place to stay, you took care of me and truly let me become a part of your amazing family, which has changed my life forever. The time I spent with you, Joan, Andrew, and Marissa in the year of millennium really made an impact on the person I have become and I am today. I am so grateful for everything you have done for me, and I often reflect on our long discussions about history, politics, economics, and understanding how the world is connected, always with your curiosity and openness. Another thing that makes our connection special is that we've stayed close and that you have got to know both Sandra, Nora, and Alfred. Some of the happiest memories we have as a family are moments that we've shared with you. And all of us feel extremely fortunate for all the time we've spent laughing and enjoying each other's company at Casa Huber. We may have lived far away, but we always felt very close to you, being able to pick up discussions and jokes even if a year has passed. Finally, the unconditional love, appreciation, and proudness you always have shown for Andrew, Marissa, Joan, and Henry really show what a great and genuine person you are as a dad, grandfather, and husband. As I told you many times, it really feels that I won the biggest jackpot on the lottery, being a lost Swedish kid finding an American dad and family like yours. Thank you for everything, Joe. You will always be in our thoughts, and we will miss you endlessly. Love, the crazy Swede family. Thank you. Now, Marissa. I know, it flies by when you're having fun.
Okay. You guys hear me? All right. So, yeah, he said, I don't want any of this gobbledygook, but it's dad, and he raised this hippie daughter. I don't know how. Him and mom. So that's your fault. And I'm going to give you two sides. I'm going to give you dad in his own words. So I don't know, some of you guys might know, but he started a blog in 2012 called The Truth on Common Sense. In 6 years, he wrote 1,279 blog posts, articles, essays, and this was he was very passionate about it. So this is what he wrote on his background information. I started this blog in February of 2012, shortly after I retired. My intentions are to write about literally anything and everything. Although I spent my entire career in the financial services industry, I have had many other experiences throughout my life. I tend to be somewhat philosophical, perhaps a people watcher and an observer, but I have always thought that a person should take a little from everything they do, everywhere they go, and everyone they meet with them on life's journey. I have always thought of myself as an international person, so you will find many events and ideas from far beyond our shores, which separate America from the world beyond. I welcome your thoughts on the topics that I have written about, but either way, thanks for visiting my blog. So he was very welcoming on his blog. He could be gruff in person. Throughout this blog, you'll notice a recurring theme. Make peace, not war. Young men and now women shed blood and die in war on both sides. Generals establish careers, and old men, corporate profiteers, generate unseemly profits. During my 4.5 years in the U.S. Army, after infantry OCS, I was commissioned in military intelligence, spent 1.5 years in Vietnam, and then 1 year at our intelligence agency's general headquarters in Arlington, Virginia. So I saw communications intelligence and security from both ends of the spectrum. At that time, I was still too young and foolish to realize the dangers of war. Now I know better. War should only be fought as an absolute last resort. Take care of the remaining returning troops, men and women, by all means. But let's stop building monuments to war and use those funds to celebrate peace. Create scholarships, establish international forums for civilians and academia, form projects for people to work together in worthwhile efforts, and most certainly keep the defense industry lobbyists out of the Pentagon and the halls of Congress. So he was, very liberal, but in his last few months, he really was thinking about Vietnam a lot, and he would get choked up talking about, you know, the men and women and his friends. So that meant a lot to him, and, you know, he also appreciated everyone else's views, and he was always open for a discussion, and I appreciated that about my dad, because, you know, whoever's here, we all have so many different points of view, but he would sit and talk to you. He could be a pain in the ass, which many of you know too, but if you had your facts or you had a strong opinion, he could have a good conversation. And I'm gonna try to edit this, but I'm Dad's daughter, so this might be a little long, and if you were at Andrews, it was long too, so I just wanted you to hear what our family thinks of my dad. So first of all, I want to thank everybody for coming here today. I mean, there's people all over the world who are here in spirit, from Tokyo to Sweden to Hawaii to Pennsylvania to New Jersey to Davao. Yeah, the Philippines, Jordan, and Jacksonville, everywhere. And I keep coming back to the same thought that, you know, we're heartbroken, but we're also like simultaneously, I feel so grateful and so lucky to have had my dad. Not everyone gets a chance to have a father, or to have a father that, like my dad. And I got to have a close relationship with him and have him for 39 years, and Andrew for 24. And there was not one moment where I doubted that he was proud of me, that he believed in us, that he thought we could do anything, that he thought girls could do anything, that he loved me beyond measure, and that there was nothing he wouldn't do for us, you know, or for any of our many friends and family and many of you here today. You know, he wouldn't want to talk about it, but he would do anything for any of you. And even at a young, and how many people are aware of that, like their whole life? I mean, that really sets you up to be, you know, a little narcissistic, maybe? No. Confident and humble and lucky. So, like, at a young age, I knew that I was special to Dad. Andrew was born when I was 2.5, I think. And he was worried that, you know, I guess he was worried that I would feel like shorted, and I was princess number 1. So the night before he left to go to the hospital, he said, I'm gonna, you know, we're having a special dinner. I was a toddler, but I remember this. And he's like, we're gonna dress up. He set the table outside. We sat on the patio, and he liked shrimp cocktail, one of like 10 foods he liked. But he says, okay, we're gonna have shrimp cocktail. He put apple juice in a little goblet. We sat outside. There was the moonlight. And he's like, well, we have to eat every single shrimp, either like this, or we had to feed each other. Like, it was very monumental and epic. And I just remember that he always wanted us to feel like very loved, and that was important to him. And I was a very self-aware toddler. So, and then Dad did the bedtime routine each night, and he was very creative. He would we would walk together like we were trains, or we were E.T. in the basket, and, you know, he like made up something different every night, it seemed like. And he would tell stories about Marissa and Andrew, the astronauts, who lived in a parallel universe. So, and I think that's how, they were really great stories, you know, and I think he really encouraged our love of creativity and imagination from an early age, because Andrew and I were always writing and telling stories, and, you know, to this day. So, and he also loved to sing. He said Mom couldn't sing because she would make us cry, but he was very proud of his singing voice, and he loved to sing really depressing songs that make you want to, like, you know, crawl into a hole. He would sing Yesterdays by the Beatles, and I cannot hear that song without crying. He would sing Sound of Music. He was a fan of musicals. I mean, there were songs like Your Mom's Gonna Leave, so we were starting to think, like, was there something he was trying to tell us? Were they having issues? You know, they were like, I think, what was the one from Bess, or I don't know. Yeah, it was like Mama's Little Sweetheart, you know. I don't know. They were just so depressing, and we're like, oh. But he also liked Somewhere Over the Rainbow, and that was like our song, the Kermit version. And he'd say, you know, this is our song. We're gonna, one day at your wedding, we'll dance to this. And I'm like, I don't want to grow up. I don't want to get married. You know, it worked out. Thank you. But, but we did dance to that at our wedding, the Kermit version. And he was a character. He was spinning around. Yeah. So, but I just wanted to say, like, we had a happy childhood. When I look back, and I have so many memories of just days with Dad, riding bikes. He would throw our bikes in the car and go to the track. He would stick us on the carrier, and, you know, he taught us to ride our bikes. He threw us around in the pool. We wrestled. He played with the other kids. I mean, John, he took you guys to the construction site when you were little, because Dad, he was very like, oh, the boys are interested in construction vehicles? Well, Joan, let's go to the construction site. Let's go to the firehouse. But that's cool, because not everybody's dad would think to do that, you know? And he really encouraged us, if we were interested in anything, science, art, dinosaurs, whatever, he would encourage that, and he would like foster that. It wasn't his own agenda. It was like, oh, what do you guys love? Okay, well, let's learn about that. Let's do something. Let's go to NASA. Let's go to the Air and Space Museum. You know, we went to a bunch of air shows. And actually, he was really proud of us, and he was really proud of Andrew's knowledge about, like, I mean, Andrew could memorize the craziest facts about anything. And we were at an air show one time, and I feel like the pilot was talking about, I think it was like an F-13 versus an F-14, and the guy said something about like the engine, and Andrew goes, no, that's on an F-14, not an F-13, like something like that. And the pilot's like, and Dad goes, you know, the pilot thought about it, and he's like, you know what? Young man, you're right. And Andrew was right, and Dad was so proud. He would always like tell everybody that story. And yeah, like we played basketball on horse, and he was always up for playing. And that's one thing that I'll always remember about my dad. Like, I don't remember him ever saying, you know, I'm tired or whatever. And I'm tired. I'm 39 with a 4-year-old, and I'm like, how did he do it? You know, he had to commute to Miami every day too. So I appreciate that. And then when I was 11, I had CCD at Catholic school. And we had this teacher who was like fire and brimstone, and he said, oh, you know, a little nuts, but he was volunteer. He said, oh, you know, all you kids, you're all going to hell. If you think a boy is cute, you're going to hell. And we're like, oh my God, you know, all the kids were like, what's wrong with this guy? It was very dramatic. So I told Dad, and like most people, they tell their parents, I don't know what happens. But Dad was angry about that. He called the school, and they said, well, if you want to come in, you can come in and look at the class. So then I'm like, oh gosh, my dad's going to come to this class. What's he going to say? I'm in 6th grade. I was not looking great anyway with my fake tooth and my, you know, hair. But it was good. So he came, and he got and folded himself up into that little chair in the front row. And he sat and he listened to the class. And I don't even remember what happened, but it was just so funny. And I was kind of proud that he believed me, and he came to the class, and he respected us, even when we were little kids. He would respect people. And I think, you know, unless you were an ass, maybe then he wouldn't, but he would be open about that. But he listened to me, and the kids knew that the teacher was a little off, so I thought it was cool that my dad was willing to come in. And anyway, later on they told my dad, well, if you want to teach the class instead, you can. And he's like, I'm good. He wasn't very religious or anything. But the teacher did tone it down a little bit. And I don't remember anything after that. One thing I wanted to also mention is that, like, he never complained about taking us to and from events or driving us around, you or Dad. You know, middle school, not everybody's parents, and who knows the circumstances, sometimes they can, but not everybody's parents is willing to drive all the kids and then take them all home and pick them up. And my parents never minded or complained. And I used to think maybe I got invited to things in middle school because my parents were known for being super generous with the rides in the minivan. But I'll never forget, just like, you know, you'd be with some kids, and you could see that someone was like a little stressed out about thinking like, okay, was my mom going to pick me up? Am I going to be able to get home? Like, and the part where I would know absolutely my dad would take you. And I would say to the kids, like, don't worry, my dad will come pick us up. He'll take you home. Don't worry. And you could just see like some 13-year-old kid, just their face would relax, and how good to feel that my parents would do anything for anyone. You know, like that's the part that makes you feel like, you know, because he was really special. And sometimes I felt a little jealous of the close relationship that Andrew and Dad had. They were like two peas in a pod. You know, they were interested in the same things, and but I always felt included, and I could go to any air show I wanted any day where it was 105 degree. And, you know, I stopped going later on because it just wasn't my thing. And I'd bring my fanny pack and pack it with all my mixtapes, but I always felt included. And and I didn't feel left out. And I feel like I was a protective older sister, so I felt proud that they were, you know, best friends. And Andrew inscribed a book to my dad that he wrote at probably age 12. And it said, "This book is dedicated to my dad. He is not only my father, he is also my best friend." He wasn't a showy guy, but he did dress up to walk me across the football field in the rain on homecoming court. And everybody was wearing ponchos. He's like, "No, we don't need to wear ponchos. You know, I'm going to hold the umbrella so we'll look nice." And I wore one of the Kumix dresses, black one. And then I also wore combat boots because it was raining. Yeah, and we made quite the duo, and he was very gallant. He taught us to ride bikes and later cars. He had me go through the McDonald's drive-thru where I sideswiped the metal something or whatever, and he wasn't even mad about it. He's just like, you know, "You really didn't make that angle," you know. I'm like, He's like, "Well, you have to pay." I still had to pay for the food, and then we, you know, sat in the parking lot, and he's like, "Well, you have to drive home. You know, you can't let it shake you up too much." And Dad wasn't like a big phone talker. To some people he was, or if you were one of his clients. I don't know if you got to talk to him on the phone a lot, Nancy. He'd say, you know, I don't need to talk on the phone. You're here to talk to Joan. But he really liked his job, and he loved what he did. He was a financial advisor for 39 years. I was not a banker. But he had clients his entire lifetime, and we still need to let them know because he's still emailing some of them. He would not only email the clients, but he had one lady, she had a granddaughter. I think she had some money. She says, "I want to teach her how to invest," you know, and she's six years old. So Dad said, "All right, I'll send you some little lessons." He's like, "Marissa, can you proofread these? Are these a little over her head for 6 years old?" And I'm like, "Probably," you know, like knowing Dad, like sometimes it's over your head for like 55. But I just thought it was so nice that he took the time to explain something and try to put it into a 6-year-old terms for one of his clients, you know. And he actually would, when we go through some of his emails, he talks about all of my cousins and the ones who aren't here and his siblings, or he'll say, "Oh, my niece Megan, she's at MIT. Oh, your daughter's in Harvard," you know. And he'd talk about, "Oh, well, Kara, my cousin, is doing this, and she's very smart," and, you know, all the boys. He always had something where he would connect. And, you know, I went to college. We didn't talk a ton when I was in college because, again, he hates the phone. And he thinks that, like, the one thing that would drive me crazy is he thought everyone, they just want to talk to Joan, or, "Oh, everyone's here for Joan." Or it's like, okay, Dad, people actually do like you too. And maybe we're all crazy. Like, where's Ashley? The best thing is when Ashley said, she came over after Dad died, and you gave me this big hug, and you go, "Joe was the best." And I'm like, I know, he really was. He pretended like he wasn't, but he really was for the people he loved and he cared about. He was the best, you know. If you got it as bad list, he was a real crotchety pain in the butt, but that's all right too, you know. He was quirky. So he got into, he wasn't good on the phone, but he got into email big time, like, and he started, and he also would like write cards. He gave like a beautiful speech at my wedding that ran longer than this and made everybody cry, and the food, and I'm thankful for it because it was one of the best memories of my life. And he would write like really long letters for your birthday cards in this crazy cursive handwriting, and it was rhyming sometimes, but really like he really did have deep feelings and big love. So he got into email, and many of you know that. He would send so many articles. Like, you couldn't keep up with the amount of articles that Dad sent to people, and he wouldn't even write a note in the line. It was just like, you know, here you go, read this. Okay, 5 hours later, 24 hours later, did you get my email? I haven't received it. I'm like, Dad, I'm at work and I'm so swamped today. I don't have time to read this email and give you a book report. You know, he's like, I don't know what you're doing. But then sometimes, or like, where's Amanda? Oh yeah. He'd say, I don't know if Amanda replied to my email. It took her 2 weeks. We're like, Dad, Amanda's got a crazy job. Like, you know, anyway. So then I'd say, well, did you read the article? No, I just thought you would want to read it. So I'm like, Dad. But then sometimes I would read them and I would respond, and he would like not even write an email. So I started saying, well, if I'm going to write you a nice email, then you should write me a long email, you know. So, but what I thought was, in like dad code, if he sent you an email, it was just him saying, what did I say? Just as I knew, sometimes I'd respond to them, so he knew I cared. But he knew. Just as I knew that these emails were not necessarily about me needing to do homework. They were Joe Huber code for, you are important and special to me, and I was thinking of you, and I love you. And I told that to everybody here. If you've gotten an email from Joe, it's because you are special to him in some way. And one day I got aggravated that he was giving me a hard time about a response. And I thought, one day I'm going to miss getting these emails so much. And I made a folder that I just dedicated to all of his emails. And it's like clogging up my inbox. And I have never deleted one. And I said that they're tiny electronic love letters from my dad telling me that he missed me in code. I'm getting through. And he taught us to think for ourselves, to question things, to know how to problem solve. That was really important to him. You're totally right, Aunt Sissy. And to trust our own opinions. If we'd ask, do you like our friend? He'd say, doesn't matter what I think, it matters what you think. And I mean, even at a young age, and I'm like, oh my God, Dad. But when I think about it, it's quite progressive because Dad was never one to not share his opinion. I mean, oh my God. But he wanted us to know that our own opinion and our merit and what we thought of people mattered. So like for a 10-year-old or a 15-year-old kid, for your dad to say that and know, hey, I trust you to make your own decisions, that was pretty cool. And I always appreciated that, you know. And then I said one of the happiest days of our family's life was when Daniel Gadd came to live with our family. Daniel became a second son to my parents and a real brother to Andrew and me. Somehow the universe aligned to give our family and him to each other when we needed it, and we have been grateful ever since. We kept in touch with Daniel, and after Andrew died in 2005, he visited in 2006 and 3 or 4 times since. He introduced us to his now wife, Sandra, who, I mean, she's a gorgeous Swede, but also a beautiful human being. Dad loves Sandra. He says, Daniel, you're number 2 now. And his children, Nora and Alfred. And we have the happiest memories of just sitting on the couch with them, talking about politics and life and everything. And nobody will ever replace Andrew or that hole in our hearts after he passed. But seeing Daniel and his family grow over the years, getting to know them, it's a butterfly stitch that healed it a bit. Which brings us closer to my own son, Henry. The first time Dad got to meet Henry, he drove to the airport with my mom, and Dad was very, like, blasé. Like, oh, yeah, Oh, I don't care about that. I don't care about that. That's why we think that he probably did want this. He just didn't know how to say it. So, all facades were off with Henry. He's in the car, he jumps out and he runs up, to the car, and he's like, oh, sits next to him in the seat. And Dad was so smitten. They took him home, and the two of them just sat there like gazing at Henry. And on the return trip home, Dad would always sit in the back seat just holding Henry's hand, And Henry and Dad had a good relationship. He's still 4, so he's also a pain in the ass. It runs in the family. And but he loved his grandpa, and they really loved each other. And I'm just going to read this one excerpt from Dad that he wrote. He wrote 10 letters to Henry about his life. And he said, Henry, previously when your mommy was arriving or leaving the airport, Lola drove. When you were 4 months old, your mommy brought you to visit so that mommy and Lola could show you off to our friends and neighbors, so that he could also meet my dad. Well, on the trips that you were coming or leaving, I made sure that I was in the car, and in the back seat, of course, so I could sit with our new baby grandson, Henry Andrew Pickles East, my favorite little boy. In 2005, my husband and I decided to move back here, and I'm so glad that we made this decision.
No, 15.
What did I say? Oh, yeah, 2015. I'm so glad we made this decision and we moved here. My parents, ever generous, said, just come stay with us while you guys figure things out. There's no rush, and we haven't. There's no, 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 but we really appreciate it. Because I'm a person, I never thought I'd live at home, and, my mom says, we're Filipino, this is how we do it, My Hispanic friends, they're like, oh yeah, of course, My American friends are like, but thank God we did, because, that was 912 days that I got to see my dad every day. Or 820 days if we assume I was traveling 10%, because that's the type of question Dad would bring up, right?
Yes.
Yeah, and I'm his daughter, so I factored that in. And it was fun to get to know Dad at a different level. We got much closer after Andrew passed, and I wanted Dad to know that he meant just as much to me as Mom did. I hope he knew that, because, probably not. He would never believe that, but I think it got in, because I told him enough times. And he liked to be gruff, but as you can't tell from this too long essay, he was a big-hearted, sensitive man inside a faux grumpy exterior who showed love with emails and teasing people. And we would talk about, one of the best memories is he would talk about all his books, and if you go to his blog, he has a book list of 25 books and his own captions about them. And what did Ryan, you're like, he could have been a copywriter. Yeah. He really enjoyed reading his past year. I mean, he has had so much fun in the past couple years. Like, that's another reason I'm not as sad, is he enjoyed seeing Henry. He loved seeing us. He liked to tease Mike about, Indiana. He told the same jokes over and over, but he really enjoyed saying them. But there was one book in particular called The Undoing Project by Michael Lewis. And he just kept reading it, and he's laughing out loud and like, let me tell you about this guy. And I'm like, all right, fine, I'll read the book. I'll read the book, Dad. So I got it on audiobook for my commute. And it is hilarious and beautiful and wonderful and really funny. And it's about like an odd couple, 2 Israeli psychologists who win the Nobel Prize in economics. That doesn't sound like a fun book necessarily. It's great. But not a spoiler, the one of them, Amos Tversky, dies in the end. And these two real people became friends off of the page. And I came to love them as my dad did. So I bawled on the drive home when Amos died. And I was so glad to just come home. I dropped my bags, didn't say hi to anybody else, and I just curled up on the couch next to my dad and said, Amos died! And I just started crying. And he said, I know. And we sat there. Mom's like, did you get fired? What's going on? You're like, And we're just like, Amos died. You wouldn't understand. You're not in our book club, Mom. And so she did read it, but that book will stick with me. And I got to give my dad a kiss each night. I got to roll my eyes when he'd make the same joke every morning, are you leaving already? I'm like, and it would annoy me because I'm like, yes, I know I'm late because I my coworkers here know. I hate my job sometimes, and it was just like really tough for a long time, but I never regretted it because I got to be here and I got to be with my family. And I knew that this is a magical time and that I would never look back on my life and not be immensely glad that I got to, I got to spend so much time with my parents and get to know them, and then to know my husband and my son. And you don't get that much time with people, you get older, you get a wedding, you get a funeral, you get a vacation, a holiday, but sometimes you get a span of 912 days, and boy, are you grateful you took it. And I was so proud that he poured so much of his time and energy into writing for his retirement. You're at 1,279 blog posts in 6 years, an average of 213 per year. It was a labor of love, and he had a following that he engaged with via email and sometimes arguments in the comments section. He'd check his hits at night. Oh, I got somebody from, Russia probably, I don't know. And yeah, I'm just so glad I can remember how happy he was. So we didn't talk every day, and Dad would say, go take care of your boys, you have your own life, Mike and Henry are the most important people. I'm like, I know, Dad, but I also have one dad, I want to spend some time with you. And but I appreciated that. And we got to have hard talks when his health started declining, like beautiful, heart-wrenching, gobbledygook talks that he finally wanted to have. And we talked about Vietnam, and his heart hurt about the young men and women who died there, and the Vietnamese people. That really, really affected him, and he never really spoke about that until later. And we talked about trips he took as a family. He got choked up telling me how his own father gave him a hug when he came down here. He's like, my dad didn't really hug, but when he came down here and saw me have you, and he saw me as a dad, he gave me a hug, and I knew he was proud of me. And I was like, all right, Dad, you got to stop. I cried all of November, so that's why I don't have as many tears right now. And he loved his siblings, and he was so proud of you guys. Oh my gosh. Especially how Uncle Denny built Pop-Up's locksmith business into, he called it the empire, and how he had such a good business sense and a love of learning. And at the end, Dad really couldn't let go. I think he was waiting. He was in peace. He couldn't really hear. But I think he was just worried about Mom. He was always worried about someone taking care of Mom. So now I guess you guys can understand why I'm heartbroken, but I'm also so grateful and lucky. And I got to call that lovable pain in the ass my dad and one of my best friends. I will miss him so much. We all will. But I hope his love of learning and knowledge will inspire you in your own unique way. So maybe you email someone or call them and tell them how special you are. Send them an article. Or really think and identify what's important in your life. You could pick up a book just to read something new. Start a passion project or a hobby. Call your local representative and voice your opinion. Or he was famous for sending letters to the editor. He sent one last month, He would love this. Update your will or contribute to your IRA. He would be really happy if anyone in this room would do that.
The right time of year.
Yes. Oh, yeah, my God. He's like, when you fix your will, maybe you'll encourage everybody else to do it. So tell me if you guys do. Or make a donation to a cause you care about. Or you could go through a McDonald's drive-thru and sideswipe your car. Play with your kids or grandkids. Or just do something that makes you happy. Thank you guys for being here today. Thank you.
Thank you, Marissa. And now we're going to have Megan and Ryan. We're going to share something that Uncle Joe had written about his wife on her 70th.
It's going to be a hard one to follow. Hi, I'm Ryan. I'm Anne-Marie's son, Joe's sister. And I'll say that, with my brother as well, some of the fondest memories were definitely growing up, coming down to the shore and spending a lot of time with Joe and Joan and Andrew and Marissa, and it was just so much fun. And I was thinking back on it, and one of the more recent, memorable conversations I had with Joe was around investment advice. I think I was like end of high school, early college. I had no money to invest or anything like that. But he had me really gung ho on water and water investments, and I'm now like, it's all coming full circle now, and I'm realizing just like the kind of patience that he had for letting things grow and develop. And I was like in high school expecting like weekly updates or money to grow or something like that. And I look back at it, water's doing pretty good. It's still an important resource and in demand. But what's come full circle is just how patient he was when he was thinking about the long term. And I know that because the second thing he said was buy property on the Nevada state line because one day that'll be beachfront. So, I'm thinking like that's a long position. So, anyways, I read this with Marissa and Joan last night. I'm actually really excited to share this with you guys. It's a letter that he wrote to Joan back in the day. So I'll do my best Joe impression. It's going to be pretty bad. But to the most wonderful woman in my life, I certainly did enjoy acting as your chauffeur for those first few days until you grew on me. And then, after a month, you left town. What did I do wrong? No, you would return to Hawaii to grad school. And then, when I was freezing my buns off in Columbus, snow on top of more snow, I remember that letter. Oy vey. There you were, on the beach in your bikini with Diamond Head in the background. And then I can remember walking to class the next way, perhaps a foot off the ground. No, Joni, it wasn't because of the leather. I was literally walking on a foot-high pile of multiple layers of snow, over ice, over snow, etc. Joni, the most truly, hugely fantastic day in my life was walking with you on August 25th, 1971, into the OSU Newman Center with a quart of scotch in hand. No, that wasn't going to get me through it. It was just a bribe for the priest to speed read his way through the Cliff Notes version. And the three next most wonderful days were from the first, when Marissa, Andrew, and then Henry were born. I've been quite lucky in choosing my playmate, and perhaps I should stop introducing you as my first wife. But you still owe me 29 years and 41 days from July 15th, as we had agreed. A deal is a deal. I love you, Joni. Thank you.
So it's very clear, especially in reading the note that Ryan just read, and this is also a letter from Uncle Joe to Aunt Joan. You could really tell that there's so much love there, and I'm trying my best, too, to get through reading this. But yeah, it starts out just how every email, if you've ever received one from Joe, in all caps, because it's really, really important. My dearest Joni, that summer in 1970, I felt honored to be asked by Marianita Albano, Madame Presidente of the OSU International Students Association, to drive her to that annual retreat at Geneva Hills in southeastern Ohio. But then I realized that I was one of the only Americans involved, or as one of the only Americans involved, there were few cars. Also, she told me that she was bringing some, I wish that you guys could see this because it's like underlined, italicized, excess baggage, which turned out to be you. Now I can see how Henry turned into such a wackadoodle. And then when we returned to campus, that previous boss lady, all Filipinas, asked me to drop you two off at a party in Columbus. And, could we call you that, or could we call you, meaning me, when we need a ride home? Now, I know how the Filipino drivers back home must feel, but I hadn't realized it yet. In time, Joni B., you grew on me until now. That you're 110 feet tall and still growing. Maybe it was the quart of Jim Beam scotch that I gave the priest at the Newman Center, because he surely got us through that ceremony quick as a flash. Joni, I honestly don't know why or how or why I went to OSU rather than pay in-state tuition at Rutgers. We've gotten through some questionable times, and I surely didn't have all the answers. But from that day when I met that excess baggage, the happiest day of my life, came the next three happiest days: the birth of Marissa, Andrew, and then Henry, and the fifth every day since August 25th, 1971. Of course, Joe. And you can really tell. I mean, that's pretty much, I think, what we all aspire to have, another partner. And yeah, I think he was, I mean, that's how he pretty much felt about everybody, too. So, thank you.
So I think it's my turn, actually. And hopefully I'll be able to get through my notes. And as I was sitting here thinking about it, I wrote this letter a few days ago in the form of lessons that Uncle Joe taught me throughout my life. And I thought how appropriate, because my mother has been in education for, I don't know, eons. So the apple didn't fall too far from the tree. I was raised by a single mother and a small village. While I didn't have a father growing up, my grandfather and my godfather, my Uncle Joe, filled that vacuum. My grandfather passed away when I was 12, but my Uncle Joe remained the constant man in my life, always present for every milestone and all the steps in between. Uncle Joe was part of my life for 38 years, from when I arrived to the United States at age 7 to now at the age of 45. And he taught me 3 of my most important life lessons that influenced and molded me. I wanted to share them with all of you today because it's the best way I know to celebrate Uncle Joe and honor the best of the life he lived. Lesson number 1, I have your back. On occasion, and very, very few occasions, there's a reason why I don't have children. I babysat Marissa and Andrew when Uncle Joe and Aunt Joan went on their weekly date nights. I just turned 16 and had my permanent driver's license. One night when babysitting, Uncle Joe and Aunt Joan came home late, and Uncle Joe offered to lead me home. It was before Google Maps, and I was already known for getting lost, especially on the way home. So I followed Uncle Joe, one car behind the other, from Plantation to my mom's house about 20 minutes away. A few miles from home, he made a left turn on a yellow light, and I followed. The light went red as I made the turn, and I was pulled over by a police officer. I was terrified, not of getting a ticket, but of my mother and her reaction. She can be very dramatic. When we finally got home and I tearfully confessed to my traffic violation, Uncle Joe stepped in before my mom could even respond. It wasn't her fault, he said. It's mine. I should not have turned on yellow, and she was just following me. My mother's only comment, well, all right. Well, just don't make the same mistake twice. I realized then Uncle Joe and my family would always have my back. Now, in full confession, in the years to come, I had many more traffic violations and a few accidents, but for the record, never made the same mistake twice. Lesson number 2, and I think we heard that many times today. This is what love looks like. Growing up, I often spent the night at Uncle Joe and Aunt Joan's house. One weekend, it was Mother's Day. Uncle Joe and Aunt Joan had gone out for the night, and the next morning, Uncle Joe gathered us, Marissa, Andrew, and me, to prepare a surprise for Aunt Joan. He crafted an elaborate scavenger hunt for Aunt Joan, who had the enthusiastic help of Marissa and Andrew as she searched for one clue after another. It culminated in a neatly wrapped gift and a big breakfast at the dining table that Uncle Joe had prepared. I thought to myself, I want this one day. Someone who loves me enough to plan a scavenger hunt, find a gift, and make breakfast despite a busy work schedule, kids, and all that other stuff. Many years later, I found that someone, my husband David, who's here with me today and probably hiding out somewhere in the back. Lesson number 3. You are woman. Let them hear you roar. I was in my preteens, and Marissa was maybe in kindergarten. One Thanksgiving, Uncle Joe invited me and Marissa to his office on Black Friday. It'd be quiet, and a few of his colleagues would also be bringing their children. It was the 80s, before Bring Your Kids to Work Day became a national holiday. Uncle Joe was a banker. All right, so he didn't like that word, financial advisor. It's the same thing, by the way. So his office a bank, wasn't the most interesting place for young kids. Marissa and I spent most of the morning in a conference room, drawing on the whiteboard and a bunch of copy paper. Occasionally, I looked through the glass walls to watch Uncle Joe taking calls. By the way, he seemed to have many of them, I think from clients, and talking to the staff who frequently walked up to him. At some point, Uncle Joe signaled for me to come and sit with him. He asked me to look out across the office floor and asked if I could guess who the top performer was. I saw a sea of men and a few women. He pointed to one of the women and said she'd been the top performer, earning over $1 million. This was the 80s, by the way, so a lot of money. A lot of money today, too. He then said, "You can be the best, but don't try to be a man doing it. You're a woman. Take advantage of who you are. Wear heels and dresses if that's what make you comfortable." Yes, Uncle Joe was a feminist. I've worked hard and have been fortunate to have a successful career in management consulting and financial services, working today at the same bank at which Uncle Joe once worked. Both male-dominated industries, leaning in, wearing 3-inch heels, I've got them on today, designer dresses, and the occasional vamp nail polish. Yes, Uncle Joe, I am woman. Now hear me roar. Through the years, I've shared this story with many young and a few old women and a few men at panel discussions, in roundtables, and in many mentoring sessions. Uncle Joe touched all of our lives in many ways, and I think he'd like knowing that he touched many, many more. And that is also part of his life's legacy. Thank you. Now, I'd like to open it up for anyone else who would like to come up and say a few words. If you don't do it now, you could do it later.
And it's okay, because there's been a lot, so don't feel like
Anyone? Please.
Okay, so I don't want to be emotional, but we all are. I'm Joe's cousin Nancy from Atlantic City. Mary and I, Joe is our older cousin. And like Marissa talked about how, as kids, Joe being a lot older than that, he was always looking out for us and all of that. I was about 11, 12 years old, Mary the year before. Joe, before he went to Villanova, was working to save money. And at that time, Atlantic City was in its heyday in the sense of the boardwalk and, the business and the summer and the beaches and so forth. Joe had a paper stand at key locations on the boardwalk, and you got that assigned every year. Mary, the 1 year on Chelsea Avenue. I was the next year at Shelf and Haddon Hall, which is now right at Resorts Casino. Joe walked the beach selling the papers as we stood at the stand. And of course, he would get mad once in a while because I'm quiet and I didn't speak. And he's like, "You need to yell headlines. You need to look in the paper, just say, Marilyn Monroe, whatever, just had a hospital visit." And then people were running by the papers. That year and probably years to follow, just the idea of the type of strength and initiative that Joe had. He worked 3 jobs to get himself into Villanova. He did the papers all day long, then went to a movie theater as an usher. Then after that, went to the local Acme and stocked shelves before he came home. So that was the type of relationship that we had. The other thing is just real quick is that when you're born near the beach, Atlantic City as we were, they say that you always have sand in your shoes. In case Joe forgets or doesn't have sand, the other day I went to the beach and there's sand from Atlantic City that I brought for him. And it's funny how on and on we say about how Joe, so many promises or so many things that take people that he wanted to take care of. You talk to him on the phone. Joe would be, my last conversation with Joe, which was on his birthday. His breathing was labored. I didn't even realize until that moment, that he was in the stage he was. But he must have spent an hour on the phone with me. Make sure you have a will. Make sure you do the medical power of attorney and all this kind of stuff. Just went on and on because it was important for him to know that people were taken care of. So this poem, which I didn't write this, obviously, Robert Frost wrote this, but it's just to me, it's, on a bigger level, just an indication of the type of person that Joe was. So I'm just going to read this real quick. Stopping by woods on a snowy evening. Whose woods these are, I think I know. His house is in the village, though. He will not see me stopping here to watch his woods fill up with snow. My little horse must think it queer to stop without a farmhouse near, between the woods and frozen lake, the darkest evening of the year. He gives his harness bells a shake to ask if there is some mistake. The only other sounds the sweep of easy wind and downy flake. The woods are lovely, dark, and deep, but I have promises to keep, and miles to go before I sleep, and miles to go before I sleep. So to Joe, you've kept your promises, you've earned your sleep. Now sleep with Andrew in heavenly peace. Thanks.
Thank you. We're going to follow that up with another poem, actually, by Anne Marie, Uncle Joe's sister. And if you can come up.
Okay, very good. So I did not write this poem. I wish that I had. However, I have to just say a personal thing. Joe was my hero growing up. I loved him. I miss him. So he was a great big brother. Anyway, so this poem is entitled Late Fragment by Raymond Carver. And did you get what you wanted from this life? Even so, I did. And what did you want? To call myself beloved, to feel myself beloved on the earth. And as we see this evening, or this day, I'm sorry, he was so loved, and he will be so missed. But he was loved on earth, and he is loved where he is now. Thank you.